another law or what have you, and we learn a lot from that. Even the language, there are bills, I think the one about the firearm in the home and you're liable if something happens. And the wording was, and you have knowledge that a child can access that. Well, what if I'm an elderly person, I've got a gun, I don't have children, and yeah, I leave my gun, you know, in the back bedroom. You never thought a child would come, and all of a sudden the neighbor's child comes in and finds the gun. So the question was, do you want that language in there? So what I just want to say is, on the surface, I don't like the bill, but then when you hear everything, you know, I've been known to change my mind, good and bad, and make big mistakes. We all do.
An act to require a 72-hour waiting period after the sale of a firearm. Who wants to give me a 30-second rundown on that? Lauren, why 72 hours? Why not 96? Why not 48?
I think 72 hours is like the latest national push that we've seen across the country. But I think the one point I want to make on this particular bill, I mean, I've seen 7 days, I've seen 10 days. The waiting period existed prior to instant background checks. The instant background check system came into play, so now when I go to Kittery Trading Post and I want to buy a gun, I get a background check. The waiting period only ever existed before the technology to pass that instant background check came to be. So when we hear that waiting periods are about suicide or they're about people in crisis, that is not what a waiting period was ever intended for, and there is no conclusive evidence.
What was it intended for? To give someone enough time to do a background check?
It was intended to get a background check done before they were instant.
Okay.
So I think it's just that nuance is important because a lot of the debate centers around suicide and mental health now, but that's not actually why the waiting period was ever in place to begin with.
The sponsors also want you to double your carbon footprint when you go and purchase a firearm.
I see. Anybody on the 72-hour waiting period? How will that do? Will that?
I doubt that has changed.
Okay. An act regarding criminal background checks for the sale, transfer, or exchange of firearms from Rachel Talbot Ross. Who wants it? No, I mean, who wants to speak? No, no.
I just got the nod. Jeff and I and some of my employees were involved in the referendum that tried to do very similar things as this bill, and it was ultimately rejected. And since then, there have been several efforts. I think this is the most recent effort to promote that same bill that comes from, you know, national folks. It's meant, the first one that we rejected at referendum would have required a background check for the casual transfer between, say, recreational shooters or hunters that were at camp and somebody's firearm jammed and you couldn't use it any longer, and I might allow them to borrow my shotgun, say, to go bird hunting. That's pretty difficult to do when you're at camp, and I think it's a major element that led to the defeat of that bill. Part of the reason, I think most of the reason why there's been such strong opposition to this bill is when you expand to private sales, you have to have a database of firearm owners to enforce it. In other words, a national registry in order to enforce it. And there's been a lot of people that are very, very reluctant to have the government know where every firearm is in the United States. There are those that do provide background checks for private sales on a voluntary matter. I know because we did, I think, between 40 and 50 of them for members last year. So there is a service that's available, and at one time there was an effort to educate on the availability of these if you wanted to do one in a private sale. That seems to have dropped off quite a bit, but this issue is very complicated. It's connected to real concerns around the government having a universal database of firearm owners. So that's the issue behind it.
Yes, sir.
I know that the Discover card is now tracing any purchase of firearm or ammunition, and they say that MasterCard and Visa will be doing that, but they don't know when.
And what will they be doing with that information?
Well, they've been asked to collect this information by someone.
By whom?
Well, you can guess yourself.
No, I can't.
But let me just say, without having the evidence, this just adds to those concerns I mentioned earlier. When private companies that handle your credit card information
Michael Bloomberg.
are specifically collecting data
Is
on
that it?
firearm purchases.
Is it really?
When somebody's collecting this information, it only makes the debate worse. More and more people become scared.
Yep.
And,
Susan?
No, I just want to say, isn't that what we're talking about, that there's a bill here,
Yeah.
an act to prohibit government officials from maintaining.
What's the number on that?
624.
So it's on page 2 there in the middle. An act to prohibit government officials. Michael Bloomberg's not a government official.
well, actually, that bill's an expansion of an existing law. I know because I helped craft with Representative Corey the bill that exists today. There is a statute that says that governments, municipal, state, and others cannot collect a comprehensive database of firearms or firearm owners in the state. So that law already exists.
Here's one, an act for humane system and the Maine Community College system to offer a for credit course in hunting, fishing, recreational shooting, and trapping. And comes from, is it Pulio?
Senator Pulio.
Pulio. Why not?
I think they should give them the month of November off, all the students.
You know, the proud member of the University of Maine class of '76, I remember hunting rifles in dormitories behind doors. And we never thought about killing anybody. Why has that changed?
Well, I can speak to this. What they're trying to do is get credit for those courses.
What's wrong with that?
We already do that. We have an education center next door. We partner with the University of Maine's 4-H program in inland fisheries and wildlife. And when I spoke with the chairs on the committee about this bill, I said, well, what they're really doing is they're asking for credit for that education. So we're already doing it.
Yeah,
next door.
sure.
And I also said, well, what about Unity College? They're doing similar programs up there to train wardens.
They have a new name now. What's the name?
Oh, it's a new,
Unity something. Yep.
it's called a university now. My point is, what is wrong with getting credit for that type of education? And I think the real answer is, they don't want anything to do with firearms, which I understand, but they're already doing it. They're doing it with me, right next door.
They have a wonderful outdoor education program. I remember Walt Abbott taking a bunch of kids up to paddle. Some of them, you know, like some of these athletes that had come in, it was ridiculously fun to watch them. They had a great time. They did not orienteering, but, you know, get out of the woods kinds of things, and they were doing it except for the hunting component. So, I don't know. What do you think? No? Okay. An act to establish a statewide relinquished firearms inventory. Is that gonna go anywhere?
So I think one of the things that you have to look at when you have these inventories is, for instance, in New Hampshire, people bring in firearms all the time and they turn them in to police departments. That happens here in Maine. We've seen efforts to require those police departments to destroy those firearms. That's frankly wasteful. I mean, the police departments could turn around and auction them as long as they're not a crime gun or a gun used in a tragedy. Police departments could auction them for revenue. So to see, you know, sometimes these firearms are worth a lot of money. I mean, they're incredibly valuable. So to see something like that be established and have to go into inventory and then to see the state just destroy them would be something that we would have concerns about.
Is that part of this? It's not just an inventory, it's the destruction of the weapon as well?
So,
Matt?
I mean, it's actually already happening. It's at the discretion of the police chiefs, though. And majority of police chiefs don't want liability of having those guns and, you know, giving them to an FFL for resale, so they just destroy them. I personally watched multiple $1,000 rifles just go into a massive shredder. And I don't think that's a good use of the resource. A lot of times, you know, the family members say, you know, their grandfather dies, nobody in the family wants the gun, they just give it to the police department. and the police department doesn't know what to do with it, they don't wanna put it back on the street because they feel like there's liability there, so it just goes in the shredder.
So this inventory is different than, like when I relinquish a gun, the police will destroy it. But this says inventory, so is this different or is this the same thing?
Well, we actually have, at the State of Maine Sportsman Show, we're half partners of the show, and we have the confiscated firearms auction from the state during the show. It's on Sunday. And the issue that I think really complicates this is there are gun collection programs by the gun control community in which they demonize firearms and say that they're bad, let's destroy them, let's make shovels out of them, let's make whatever spoons out of them. And they use that as props for promoting gun control. And when you see bills like this, it makes people go, yeah, we're gonna create an inventory, but what happens next? Are they going to go to a smelting operation out of state, come back as shovels? It becomes a promotional, political exercise, not a good policy. What is behind
Yes,
this
sir.
is to ask, what is the policy you're trying to promote?
My
They're already doing
question is tied into the other way around, part of what that Bruce Ashmore from Bucksport. Is that going to include yellow flag?
No, you can't.
Firearms?
No, the law says you can't. Under yellow flag, they have to be stored, they're the ownership. Still, the individual had the firearms removed. But I understand your question, but the statute won't allow
Will
it.
they become part of a government inventory is what I'm asking.
Oh, that is a good question.
That was the concern, because if they inventory everything that's in an evidence locker, and some of them are from a person that was red flagged that actually was relinquished and 30 days later, is there now a government list of his entire
Well,
firearm
when
inventory?
you remove firearms in a yellow flag situation, they are inventory, because the family wants them back. And we heard
Police
earlier
station, yes.
that the longest order was a year. So you've got to have an inventory so you can return those firearms in the condition you took them.
Does it stay at that evidence locker, or does it become part of the state inventory? What is it?
We have a law, that one law that was being asked against, the one that David and I had worked on together, prohibited a comprehensive list of firearms of the owners of those firearms in the state. So the state or a subdivision of the state, being a county or a town, cannot establish a comprehensive list, meaning multiple owners of firearms in one big inventory.
The
That's
policy,
where my thought is, being on that side, could this kind of nullify that and be a workaround?
well, the policy
That was my question on this.
the policy that hasn't been debated yet, and it's coming, and it will in the next few years, is the way that some companies get around that comprehensive list is to have companies maintain those lists, and then have access to those lists. The legislation that will come, and I'll predict it will be, that no business can maintain a collection of information related to firearm owners and then share that with the government, because that's just a backdoor that is now being exploited. We saw that with the credit card issue, but that door will be shut in the future, in my
The
opinion.
government does have Robert Duhame's Facebook page, though. Everybody knows what that guy is, he's on the list.
I guess
Jeff has I think Jeff's been asked, get me to you.
I've dealt with several departments and thousands of firearms in the past who have sold these firearms either by auction or by sale, always to a qualified individual, and that money is always very important for them to go into their general fund to take care of other items of business that typically wouldn't be funded. But in areas where firearms are used as a political pawn, on the other side, New York City, I've seen them turned into manhole covers. And it was all part of a big propaganda campaign to take evil firearms off the street, turn them into manhole covers, and people will hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And it would be too bad to see these, again, potentially valuable, often historically significant, always valuable pieces just turned into manhole covers or spoons, like David said. So that is a legitimate concern.
An act to strengthen Maine citizens' Second Amendment rights by allowing the discharge of firearms on private property that's within 500 feet of school property in certain circumstances. Unbelievable that the Sportsman's Alliance of Maine would want to support this, Dave. I mean, shooting across the playground, kids on the monkey bars, what?
I said I've talked to the sponsor of this bill, so I want to be very clear that this is a very narrowly tailored bill. It is literally only to clarify Maine's self-defense law, so that if there was a situation where you were using lawful lethal force, that 500-foot buffer zone, if you had a house located within that buffer zone, you would not be charged additionally under federal or state law. So it is not meant to allow shooting ranges in the backs, in the backyard of an elementary school. It's literally just to clarify the discharge of a firearm in a life or death situation when lethal force would be authorized because you are abutting school property. So I think it's just
That's interesting, I'd never thought of that. So if you were shooting a school shooter from your property next to the school,
Yeah.
you'd be a hero, but you'd be in violation.
Or if someone broke into your home.
Yeah.
So that's really what the
Yep.
law is dealing with. It's just to clarify Maine's self-defense law, but the title is a little misleading in terms of.
If I'm not mistaken, all this does is bring Maine into alignment with federal law anyway.
We don't care what happens in other states.
Well, federal law. This is part of Bill Clinton's crime bill, allows this in there, part of that whole assault weapons foolishness. So this would just bring Maine into alignment with what federal law existing federal law already is.
An act to enhance certain penalties for possession of firearms by prohibited persons. Anyone know about this particular, who are the prohibited persons, etc.? Why are you neutral?
Convicted felon is a prohibited person.
Yep.
Yes.
Is,
Adjudicated, those aren't our positions, by the way.
oh, they are? Okay.
Well,
Those adjudicated with mental illness are white paper. Those individuals.
What's a white paper? I didn't know what a blue paper or yellow paper was either.
When the courts have adjudicated you as suffering from mental illness,
Yep.
it's a
your
blue
risk.
paper.
Yeah, literally.
It is.
It is. Blue papering is temporary, white papering is permanent.
Okay.
They would be added to the database of prohibited individuals.
So,
The operative word on what you just read is enhance. It already is a law. This person wants to go from a Class D to a Class C crime.
so what's that mean?
That means he wouldn't go to the jail, he'd go to the Maine Correctional Center.
I think it's really looking at sort of some of the issues we've seen around drug trafficking. It's aimed at those individuals who are trafficking that also tend to have firearms. They're looking to enhance the penalties for those folks, is my understanding of why this individual put this bill in.
We've talked, yes, I'm sorry.
Question, was there a bill that came up, it might have been defeated, about the age of a child being able to hunt in Maine?
The age of a child.
Yeah, I can
didn't
answer that. There was a bill that a few years ago passed to allow
This session.
any age. That bill passed, so the parent chooses when the child can go hunting.
But the parent has to accompany the child until what age?
I can't remember.
14?
14, I believe.
I don't know either.
Yeah. There was a bill to raise that from 0 age to 5,
Right.
and that bill failed.
It was really cute. I remember it was like 8 years ago. It was my very first session on inland fisheries and wildlife, and we had a little girl that came in, and we had to put a chair in front of the podium so she could stand up on the podium, and she had written her speech, and it was the cutest thing you've ever seen. And she got up there and she talked about how her daddy takes her to the shooting range, and she keeps her finger off the trigger until she's ready, and she went on and on and on, and she sounded better than 9/10 of the adults in front of us in that committee, and we were all like, yeah, absolutely, if she's wants to go hunting, she should go hunting, so.
An act to improve, protect, defend the individual's civil right to bear arms through exemption of firearms and ammunition from taxation. And whoever takes this, I don't know whether it's Pittman Robinson or Dingle Johnson, but doesn't IF&W get money from taxes on ammunition and guns?
Yeah, I can take that one because one of our board members is testifying on that bill right now. The sponsor of the bill, Representative Ardell from Monticello, had submitted a bill to exempt from sales tax guns and ammunition. And having chaired the taxation committee as a senator, I knew that that had a difficult time, if maybe even 1% chance of passage. And so I went to him and said, I have an idea to present to you that I think maybe ups your odds of passing a bill that could do something good. And he said, what is it? And I said, well, are you familiar with Pittman-Robertson Act? And he said, well, yes, I think I am. It's a 10 or 11% excise tax on firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment. That was created in 1937. The money that is generated from that tax goes to the federal government, and through a formula is redistributed to the states for conserving wildlife habitat, hunter education, habitat improvements, access for the public, and it is the most successful conservation program ever proposed. I said to him, why don't you consider taking the sales tax that's generated from the sale of firearms, ammunition, and archery equipment, dedicate that to inland fisheries and wildlife under the same formula as Pittman-Robertson, and distribute those funds to those same programs for the stateside match. He said, I love the idea. His leadership said, I love the idea. He's now presenting that to the taxation committee. In addition, it also resolves a property tax issue that was raised several times during the gubernatorial election and by some candidates seeking office, and that is when you take property off the tax rolls, it hurts the tax base in the town. Pittman-Robertson also has a provision that says that Pittman-Robertson money can be used as payment in lieu of taxes when land is purchased by the state. Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is one of the only agencies of government and conservation as well. When they buy something and it becomes state-owned, it comes off the tax rolls. So I suggested that the same language be applied to that bill as in Pittman-Robertson, and that way we'll have a program to compensate towns who take and sell their land individually, and it comes off the tax rolls. So that's an important provision within that law, and if it comes out of tax with a positive report, there's a chance we can finally resolve that issue.
So that rich town of Cumberland where I live, the land trust buys something, does that land come off the tax rolls?
Over 90% of the land out there right now by land trusts is in some sort of payment in lieu of taxes. It's actually the state government agencies that aren't paying the taxes.
So you're saying that the Pittman-Robertson money or Robinson money, whatever it is,
Robertson.
would
It can be.
who would that money go to now? The town? To make up for the tax revenue
Yeah,
lost?
what-
For how long? Indefinitely, a one-time deal or what?
Oh, it can be either. The provision that I proposed in this bill would allow that during the negotiations, if a town wants to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes, they could do that. If they didn't, they just do a checkoff box. We don't care, we love the project, we don't want the tax money. So there would be an option available when the land is purchased for the town to negotiate a payment in lieu of taxes that would be one-time or ongoing.
Interesting. And an act to allow bail commissioners to carry firearms in correctional facilities and jails. So I'm coming in to bail somebody out, and I'm gonna strap on my .38 and go in there? Or what's the need for that?
So I haven't read this bill yet. It hasn't even been scheduled for a public hearing yet. Obviously, one of my concerns is everyone is disarmed when you go into a jail facility. Even police officers, when I go to a jail facility, I have to take my gun off. I think it makes the facility secure. So I'm not sure what his intent is here.
Yes, you're not supposed to have a gun if you're working in there, but there is an exception. And the exception is we do have investigators who are sworn law enforcement officers in the prison. They're the ones who do the investigations, and they carry a firearm, and they're allowed. And then there was another one having to do with if you could have, I think, it passed last year. There's another one that the commissioner allowed and agreed that people who have concealed weapons, they can at least have them in their car, but don't bring them inside. But I'm gonna look, because there was a bill about that.
Go ahead.
I spoke to the sponsor of that bill, and like you said, most of us, when we go through the Sally Port, we have to secure weapons, and nobody actually inside the containment facility, you can't be armed at all, we even have to take our tasers off. But he explained that there were a couple of facilities where the bail commissioner goes, they actually don't go in where you disarm. But where they go and work, they're not actually in the part where we would normally have to disarm, we would be able to go there. But because of some statute or part of the law, that's already been, they're not, the bail commissioners are not. You and I would be able to go there with our weapons, but they're not. And that's what that's meant to address.
The bill did pass last year, and it's signed into law, and it has to do with, unauthorized possession of firearm in prison or jails, or authorized and passed, so I don't know why this one's any different. If anything, I think the commissioner liked it because he didn't have to negotiate it in a contract.
When forest rangers wanted to carry firearms 5 years ago, somebody in a news meeting said, if you carry firearms on the job in Maine, you get a better pension. Is that true?
That could be. As a state employee female in the 70s.
Who never touched a gun?
I had the same job as a guard or someone at the Maine State Prison. They had a better pension. Why? Because they're trained in weapons, and we weren't. So the females weren't.
There's no direct correlation, though. It's all the retirement plan, which they negotiate in their state contract. Being armed is not the caveat to getting it.
Someone probably sent us an email suggesting that, you know, the real reason for this is because they want to make more money and therefore, and also have a better pension or something. And you discuss the stuff and you think, I don't know, you know, you're trying to figure it out and it just happened to come to mind. So it's kind of it's happenstance. It's in the negotiation process. Yeah, firearms training might make you more money.
Well, when they do pensions and job descriptions, they look on dangerousness. And if you're carrying a weapon, that you're getting more points, so therefore you'd have a better pension.
I think you should go back and renegotiate your pension based on
Guess what?
on bravery.
That's a whole different
I could have been
story.
carrying a gun, but I didn't. So how about a little something extra?
We won the lawsuit, and then the state said we don't have the money to pay you.
Well, tax the people, for God's sakes. All right. An act to allow. Oh, that's it. Anybody get it?
Bill, you missed 644.
Oh, I thought we discussed it as part of an earlier one. An act to prohibit government officials from maintaining records related to firearm owners. What do you got? If it's so important to you, why don't you ask a question? Or pardon me?
Just wants you to be.
Oh, yes. Well, no, I think it's very interesting. Let's talk about it. I thought it was part of, I think Susan had mentioned it earlier.
Sounds a lot like the other one, but.
So I thought I combined it in our interesting discussion, but let's talk about it now. We've got 3 minutes.
We talked about it. What happened was, it was a law that I had passed a while ago that Sam and I had worked on together, and it was the one that prevented, the state government or a subdivision of the state from creating, registries of privately owned firearms or their owners. And it adds something to that, but I don't really understand.
That's what I was curious, how it differed from what we already have.
Yeah, I don't know what it's trying to
You know,
do. I kind of read it and I'm like, I always fear with something like that, that once you open something up, that somehow something gets messed up, so I don't know if I like things being opened up personally.
As David mentioned, I am a SAM member, and I like to hunt. I like to fish. I'm not a world class go to Alaska kind of guy, but I really enjoy it, and I don't want the government messing with me. Conversely, I don't want school shootings in my state. Example. What should we, as conscious people who use firearms, what should we be most worried about? Take it.
So I don't know what we should be most worried about, but one of the things that, listening actually to Susan talk about, not even being aware that someone would have a gun in their car when they dropped off their child to school. We have a divide in Maine, and it's only growing because people that, for them, a firearm is so comfortable and so part of life, I'll go to the state house and it's very natural. guns were everywhere in my growing up years, right? I don't hunt, but everyone around me does, and you know, it's very normal. My next door neighbor brought his firearm to school every day because they had shooting practice. That was part of life. He literally got on, and all his friends did too, got on the bus with their firearm and went to school. It was normal. And I remember my sister-in-law, when she first moved to Maine from California, had never seen a firearm in her life. She just arrived, basically. She was at my house, and someone knocked at the door, so she goes and opens the door, and my cousin is standing there with, you know, a 50 caliber BMG, like big, massive thing. She just screamed and ran. And I was like, oh man, bad timing. But, you know, I had to go calm her down. But the thing is that, you know, maybe these legislators who have zero experience, they've never handled a firearm, they don't understand. They have an instinctual fear. So if you say, hey, we would like to possibly have someone be armed in school, like, you know, maybe they're a retired police officer, maybe they need a little bit of warming up to what this means and how it's a natural way of life, because they're instinctually going to vote against things because they have no real life experience with them being just a part of life. So I think there's a divide there of them thinking that they're just unsafe, and it just stems from their way of life and our way of life.
That's the biggest difficulty sitting in that committee. Who's there? The Republicans are sitting there, the Democrats are sitting there. The Republicans predominantly come from smaller communities or what have you. Then you've got the Portland crowd, and I'll say that. Or anyone else, no, or myself, even Southern Maine, what have you. But that's the challenge for being a good legislator. You've got to put the blinders, listen to the argument, and if you are a proponent and you argue, you've lost everybody. Just state the facts. And it is difficult. Some change, some don't. I mean, I've changed my mind a couple of times. I still don't like it, but I understand it. It took a while. And listening to Senator Collins tell me, I can't imagine her holding a gun. She goes, I went hunting with my father, you know? So, but that doesn't stop us from being good legislators.
I think maybe
Lauren had her hand up.
I'm going to dovetail really quickly off of both what Senator Deschambault and Senator Kime said, but I moved to Sanford. I live in Sanford. We're right next to Wells. I belong in a community group in Wells. And one of the things that we're facing is a lot of folks have summer homes, or they're now year-round residents, and they've come in from states like Massachusetts and New York and New Jersey and Connecticut that have very strong gun control laws. And so they come here, and one of the things we've run into is they see someone duck hunting, or they see someone, they hear a gunshot from a shooting range that their property abuts, and to them it is startling. They are fearful, and they immediately call their legislature and tell them to put a bill in. We need to do something about these shooting ranges. And so I think, you know, for those of us who have grown up here, we have a really strong heritage of firearm ownership in the state, and there's a really good reason for it. When you live in the Allagash or you live in Jackman, you have a police response that can be upwards of hours. So it behooves you to have a firearm. And so I think that right now Maine is seeing some demographic shifts, and a lot of it is folks are coming and they don't